Now somebody's going to say, well, what about 1 Corinthians 11? So let's look at that. Now, so far, it's abundantly clear what Scripture says about life in the church as regards women preachers. But here in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, in the very same book, without any confusion, Paul says in verse 3, 1 Corinthians 11:3, but I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man. The man is the head of a woman. God is the head of Christ. God's the head of Christ. Christ the head of the man. The man the head of the woman. That's the order. That's the divine order. That's how it has to be. And then he says this, every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head. Every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head, for she is one and the same as the woman whose head is shaved. Well, that's a strange kind of thing. What's going on here? In the course of life as believers, there will be times when women pray. Obviously, they're not doing it in the church, in the order of the church, in the service of the church. That's crystal clear. I've showed you everywhere it says that. But in the fellowship of the saints and in the opportunity to preach the gospel, proclaim the gospel, give testimony, there are going to be times in homes, in social gatherings or whatever, that women are going to be praying. And there are times when women are going to be speaking. Praying means you're speaking to God about people. Prophesying means you're speaking to people about God. You're going to be speaking the truth of the gospel to someone. You're going to be praying to God on behalf of someone. So you're praying to God, talking to God about people, or talking to people about God. That's going to happen. And a great host, the Old Testament says a great host are the women who publish the good news. So all of us, men and women, are called to pray. We're to be praying for people. We're to be praying together with people. We're to be communicating the truth of the gospel. We're to be nurturing one another, speaking to one another in edifying ways. Paul says when you're doing that in just the normal life of the church, men don't want to have something on their head. Women do. He's talking about a head covering. This is apparently a local custom. I don't know how far it extended. But I'll show you how important it is. If a man has something on his head, when that is traditionally what women do, then a man is acting in an effeminate way. And he is doing some kind of spiritual praying or proclaiming the truth, but he's got a covering on his head. He's dishonoring his Lord and himself. Because in that culture, women wore head coverings and men did not. So if a woman uncovers her head while praying or prophesying, she disgraces her head, for she is one and the same as the woman whose head is shaved. What women shave their head? Lesbians, prostitutes. Sometimes they shave the head of adulteresses. In other words, what Paul is saying, when you act as a believer in any setting publicly, maintain the visible symbols of your manhood and womanhood. We live in a culture where they're trying to rub that out, right? Where androgynous hairdos and androgynous clothes and who knows what that person is, transgender, rejecting the reality of gender, all of this is a complete assault on God's divine order. So the local custom was that women in public wore a covering, a symbol of their femininity. It's the same today. I mean, I can look out and I can tell exactly who the women are and who the men are because of your hair. That's a cultural cue. Men are looking like men and women are looking like women. But apparently in the Corinthian society, because there was so much confusion about that, as you would expect in a pagan, idolatrous culture, some women had come to Christ but hadn't shed some of those rebellious characteristics. And perhaps some of the men as well. There may have been some effeminate men, sure, because what does Paul say to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 6? Effeminate, homosexuals, such were some of you. You may have dressed like a woman. You may have manifest effeminate symbols. Or you may have been part of a women's liberation movement. There were many of them in Rome. We read about women running around with spears sticking pigs, women wearing armor, carrying swords, women shaving their head. All these kind of rebellions were part of the ancient world. Paul is just saying, look, as a believer, you need to make sure people know you're a man or you're a woman. If you didn't know that was under attack in the past, you would know it today, would you not? A man with a head covering was effeminate. A woman without a head covering was masculine. Symbols are important. Our culture has popularized fashions that blur those lines. When you go shopping, guys, go to the men's department. And if you can't tell whether you're in the men's department or not, go somewhere else. Ladies, go to the ladies' department. No place for transvestism, cross-dressing, gender confusion. When a woman dressed in socially female style, she was declaring her understanding of God's order. She was declaring her understanding of the divine uniqueness of being a woman, and she was testifying to her submission to that divine design and her submission and devotion to her husband. And for a Christian, further, she was declaring her devotion to Jesus Christ. But as is clear in this letter, the Corinthians had a hard time separating from their former lifestyle. And they needed to be instructed to do this. Head coverings aren't the issue. Wearing those symbols that clearly designate you as a woman, that's an issue. Wearing those kinds of symbols that clearly declare you as a man, that's an issue. And this is God's design. Verse 7. Anything other than that is disgraceful, verse 6 says. Verse 7 says, a man ought not to have his head covered, since he is the image and glory of God, and the woman is the glory of man. God is the creator of man out of nothing. God is the creator of woman out of man. The man's glory is in the image of God. The woman is that she is created by God from man. A man doesn't originate from woman, but woman from man. For indeed, man was created for the woman's, not created for the woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake. In other words, keep these distinctions clear. Authority, submission.